since you can't see what's going on, just letting you know that we are still admitting people to the meeting, so we're going to wait a couple minutes. All right, I think we'll get started in just one minute. Okay. Well, it appears that the folks joining the meeting has slowed down. I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone and just for now until we get to the point where other folks can, where we'll have you all talk, just so we don't get any extra feedback. So thank you to everyone for joining us and also for your patience through this process. I know that it has been a really challenging year for a lot of reasons. Just so much going on, and I know COVID is making everyone's lives a little bit more difficult, and add on to that, you know, the way the last legislative session happened and challenges with budget and all of that. I think it's just been a very hard time for everyone. So, you know, we empathize with everybody's challenges and struggles, and just really appreciate your patience as we try to continue to improve our processes and our policies and move ourselves towards a better system. So one thing I wanted to note at the outset is that we are recording this meeting, and we are going to transcribe the results of the meeting so that we can share that with our commission members, and then also share some high-level notes with them. And so just wanted to give everybody notice that that's going on. And before we get really started, I did also want to make a few comments about sort of why we're having this meeting and sort of what this meeting is and what it isn't. So what this meeting is not, I'll start with that. It's not a space for us to discuss issues that relate to anything that isn't legal services contracts. So this is not the space for discussing NREs or non-attorney contracts. I mean, that said, I know that for at least for some of like the public defender offices, they do have, you know, mitigators, caseworkers, folks like that on their staff. So so that is part of the conversation, but the the separate compensation that we do to non-attorneys or to either through contracts or through NREs, those are conversations that we'll be having in separate groups. And then the other thing that we won't really be talking about is sort of specialized attorney contracts as far as the substance of those contracts go. So just thinking about the PCRP contracts, or the death penalty contracts. Those have a special substance to them that is different from our normal legal services contracts. That said, we do want to talk about process around awarding legal services contracts. So certainly the process is something that we will talk about. The other thing that I know is on everyone's minds right now is caseloads due to COVID. And we are trying to have some separate conversations about that, some higher level conversations with system stakeholders, and really want to hear from you about what is happening with caseloads in your jurisdiction. But again, that's a separate conversation from the one we're having today. So what this meeting is we really want to hear from you about how we can improve our procedures for issuing and responding to requests for proposals for legal services contracts, and then also how we can create more transparent and equitable policies for evaluating proposals and offering contracts. The input that we get from you is going to be valuable for us as we engage in discussions about legal services over the next few months before we issue contracts that will go into effect on January 1st. But this is really we know that reform is a much longer term project. And so what you're sharing with us today is not only going to impact what we're doing now and, you know, the things that we're able to do now, but what we are able to do in the future and how we can build a blueprint for moving things in a better direction. And so in addition to helping us at the agency, your responses and your feedback is going to be shared with the commission so that they can also help to guide us as an agency on how we can improve our contract processes and policies. So let's see here. Another just sort of housekeeping thing, we may need another meeting after this one. I'm not sure exactly how long this conversation is going to go, and I don't want to try to rush it unnecessarily. So at the end of this meeting, we can have a conversation about whether or not we need to call another meeting. And of course, this is not the end of our stakeholder engagement. We really are trying to continue and then improve upon stakeholder engagement so that you all can be part of the process with us and we can be better informed by the folks who are actually doing the work. So let's see here. So we have everyone muted. But what's going to happen is when we get to the part where very shortly where we're asking you for some of your input, we're going to want you to unmute yourself individually, and then or we can even unmute you, but have you raise your hand to talk. I realize that there are a lot of folks that are on the phone, and so the raise hand option is not available to them. So I think what I will do is, Casey, are you on the line? I think Casey can tell us all how we raise our hand.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, so for those of the folks that are on Microsoft Teams, would you mind explaining to people how they raise their hand? And I think for the rest of the folks, I will just occasionally ask for people to get in a queue, and I'll make a list of folks who want to make comments, and we can go through folks that way.
Of course. For those of you who are on Microsoft Teams and you are using your video feed or watching a video feed, you can move your mouse around the center of the screen and a bar will pop up. You'll see there's a hang up button, chat, etc. You can turn your camera on, off. That's also how you unmute yourself there. There's a little hand, and if you hover over it, it says raise your hand. If you click that, like I will now, my hand is raised. Kimberly is notified that my hand is being raised. She would then, call on me for my comment, and then I can unclick the button to lower my hand.
Great. And then Casey, I'm going to just ask you to help me with the noting that people's hands are raised and all of that, because some of you may, at least those of you on the video screen have noticed, I am one-handed right now. I unfortunately broke my arm, and so I am a little impaired, but that is all right. We will we'll make it through. Okay, so I already explained that we'll transcribe this conversation and give it to the commission. So many of you, I think, probably saw we did oh, and I'm just getting a message from someone saying that it looks like there isn't a hand raise option for the iPad app. So yeah, I think you could put a request in chat is a great way to raise your hand if you don't have the hand raise option. And then also, yeah, I will occasionally just ask for folks to be in the queue, and then we can go through folks that way. So so I think many of you were able to get on and fill out the online survey that we shared, and I really appreciate who did that, and encourage folks that if you're participating in this meeting and there's something that you didn't get a chance to say, or even if you've already filled out the survey and the conversation here sparks something in you that you want to share and you don't get a chance to share it on the call, definitely encourage you to jump back on that survey again and provide us with some written comments. Those comments will also be provided to the commission, and I'm kind of trying to extract from them also a sort of high-level summary of suggestions. One other sort of broad overall comment is that, I'm not here to sort of debate the merits of your suggestions or to really engage in much of a back and forth. I think the goal for this is for us to listen and hear from you and hear your perspectives so that we can take all of that in and then share that with the commission. So before we get started, I also just want to let folks know, I have been here since January. I am still learning. So there are some things that I may or may not know or understand. So I just appreciate your patience as I work through all of this with you. So what I think what I thought I would like to do is to go through question by question from the survey and share with you some of the things that we've heard from folks, so we can kind of get the conversation started, and then open it up to hear comments from you. So just starting with the first question. The first question has to do with our procedures for issuing RFPs for legal services and the procedures for awarding contracts. So what I mean by procedures is, the timing of the contracts, the instructions for the contracts, what is included in that process. And so really not the actual meat and potatoes of the substance of the contracts themselves, but the process for issuing them and awarding them. And just to share a bit about some of the things that we've heard from folks already, there were several comments about the timing of the RFP. I think that there were some folks that felt like our timelines were not particularly clear as far as the time between when they respond and when the RFPs would be issued, or when the proposals would be responded to. There were some folks who asked for more lead time between the time that we issue the RFP and the RFP has to be responded to. There were a few people who talked about just information that they thought that it would be helpful for us to provide. One comment, for example, was about how this particular person spent a long time trying to determine reasonable salaries and contract amounts, but they felt like they were kind of shooting in the dark and didn't really know what we were looking for. And so having some better picture of what it is exactly that we want would be helpful. Also, some folks asking if we could give more clear information about what we're expecting as far as overhead and staff salaries and things like that. Also, some folks wanting to know more about, like, okay, how many cases or how many hours are you wanting coverage for, because the contract may have different proposals depending on what's being asked for. And then how the information that you all provide to us is going to be used. Another issue around process, was around transparency. There was a request that we provide information about prior contracts so that people can see those and use those as a way to understand exactly how they should be putting in their RFP. And then there were a couple of comments about stakeholders. Someone suggested a committee of attorneys, investigators, and mitigators to help us understand the nature of the work suggested in the proposals. Another suggestion about involving stakeholders in a review of services to make determinations about, how funds should be allocated and how, whether to retain existing attorneys. So I would sort of put those in 4 broad categories. One is around the timing. One is around sort of the content of what's in the RFP and how much information we're providing to you about the particular area and jurisdiction and what we're asking for in that contract. Transparency around, what's being awarded, and then stakeholder engagement. So those are kind of the 4 broad areas that we got responses on, but I'm very interested to hear from folks on other things related specifically to procedures. So if anyone would like to share at this point, you can either raise your hand. Okay. And if you are on the phone, we will also give an opportunity for folks to get in the queue. So I am not seeing anybody with a hand raised. Oh, and you know what, Casey, I'm actually wondering, for the folks who are on the phone, I wonder if how they actually unmute themselves. I believe it's star.
I'm not sure the numbers. I'll call in right now and figure it out.
Okay, I think it's star 6.
It's star 6.
It's star 6. Okay, perfect.
It's star 6, yeah.
Wonderful. So if you are on the phone and you want to get in the queue, please just say your name and we'll get you in the queue. I will be surprised if we don't have anybody who has thoughts about our procedures. Let's see here.
Kimberly, we have a comment in the chat.
Okay, perfect. I love it. Okay, so this is KO. And KO, we can either unmute you or you can unmute and share your thoughts yourself, or I can read it out loud for you, whichever you'd like. Why don't you? Oh, there you are, KO.
My comment was just that it feels like the RFPs are designed and focused towards the large firms like MPD, MDI, Lane County Public Defender, and when it's a smaller firm or a solo practitioner, it makes a lot of the questions kind of difficult to know exactly what you're looking for, because it's just me, or just me and an assistant, or just me and, so I don't know what you can do on that, but I know that I've kind of gotten some of the things that seem weird to me when I'm trying to do the RFP.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. And do we have other folks that wanted to make comments about any of those things? I mean, one of the things, I guess I have a question for you all. One of the things that came up in my mind around the timing is, how much lead time do you all need? I think there's sort of two timelines that I'm very curious about. One is the amount of time that you need from when we issue an RFP to when you need to submit one. And then the second question is how much time do you need between us awarding contracts and the time that the contract goes into effect? Because one of the concerns I have is that when you all are trying to run a business and you are trying to plan for your business and make sure that you've made, you've set things up to make things sustainable, it's helpful to know what you're going to get paid and how many employees you need to have and all of those things. And so I'm curious on that end of things, like how much lead time do you need between the time that we issue a contract and it goes into effect in order to really be able to run your business well? So I see that Brooke has a question or two, if no one else does, about process. And I also am curious if there's anybody that has answered the question I just raised. But Brooke, why don't you go ahead?
All right. I assume you can hear me. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So my question is, and it's first a comment and then a question. I promise it's not just a comment. From having done this a couple times, I think there was always sort of a thought that OPDS would read the RFPs and then do the stair test to see which one was the heaviest when it fell down the stairs, and then do whatever you guys were going to do anyway. I think there's long been the thought that that's the way they're approached. I will say that I've always felt our analysts are very thoughtful about talking with us, but then at the end of the day, they have marching orders about what they can or can't do, and then we go from there. I thought that this last time around, there seemed to be a lot of openness to both trying new things and also to actually be caring about the size of caseloads and to have some much firmer levels, because you asked some very detailed questions about how many cases you have and required us to get sign off from all of our attorneys about the caseloads we are going to do. But from a process perspective, having conversations with every attorney in my office about the level of caseloads they're able to do, and then I submit a contract and are told, we're going to just extend this the way it is, means that I've lost all credibility with my attorneys that we care about their caseloads when we're not being responsive to them. So I guess my question is, since it really was more of a comment, my question is really, can we actually put into an RFP getting, following through with what the RFP says? Because otherwise, the answers you get are much more cynical than they are useful, because then we're not really going to do the work of checking in with all our attorneys to figure out caseloads if we don't think it's actually going to follow through with the result. To answer your question about timing, from my perspective, I need about 3 months lead to actually hire people. So if you're saying you want to do something, in a best case scenario, I need 3 months, because 2 weeks to a month to figure out what I'm posting, 3 or 4 weeks to interview, and then a minimum of a month to bring people on board. And it's often more like 6 months. So 3 months is the absolute minimum. Thanks.
Right. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Brooke. And I definitely appreciate the frustration with where we ended up this year. I think for all of us at OPDS, we were really hoping that we would get additional funding from the legislature and be able to really utilize that information we got from you in the RFP responses to be able to issue new contracts that were new and improved. And so we share your anxiety around that, because I think that it's been a frustrating thing for all of us, and then COVID on top of that, I think, made things much more challenging. So I have it looks like Olcott Thompson, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself. And I think maybe I can do that. I think, no, I can't unmute you, but I think you can unmute yourself. So Olcott Thompson, if you go, there's a little bar that shows up when you put your cursor over the screen, and there's a little microphone button, and if you click on that, you should be able to unmute yourself. But I'm not seeing that happen. Okay, well, if Olcott is having maybe has something else going on, is there anyone who's on the phone who wanted to make a comment? You just do star 6.
Hi, Kimberly.
Yeah.
This is Bruce Tarbox. I would, I guess, support Brooke's comments. I would also note or ask for the salary levels or things of that nature. It would be useful to have some worksheet available showing comparable government salaries for attorneys, legal assistants, and paralegals, so on and so forth, from the state perspective. So, what do comparable attorneys get paid at OJD? What do their paralegals get paid? What do the legal assistants get paid? Or what are the market rates within various jurisdictions or counties? That would be useful, I think, for everybody. I know what I pay my assistant. I'm not sure if that's a fair market value or not, but we want to get there, and that's what we're shooting for. So it would be good to have that as a tool to help us create our RFPs.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That's very helpful. Anyone else that is on the phone, go ahead and do star 6 in order to take yourself off of mute.
This is Vance Walliser, attorney.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I really appreciate those last comments. I think that really hits the nail on the head. I'm a consortium attorney in Medford, Oregon. I'm not involved in the administration. I've never been involved in the negotiating process, but I've been doing this for quite a few years. It seems like historically we've always made this work because we can factor in what we're getting by the case, and we can jiggle the numbers to get enough funding to where we can all survive as private practitioners. Now that system has been eliminated. We're no longer going to be doing that. So it's obviously a huge change. What I've never understood is that when we're looking at these contracts and looking at what fair compensation should be, is the issue of parity. It seems like the starting point should be if attorneys are working for public defenders' offices or in consortiums, that pay should be linked as a starting point to what a comparable attorney would be getting in a government position. So a mid-level attorney at a public defense office should be getting at least comparable pay to a mid-level deputy DA. And likewise, for us doing child welfare cases, dependency work, I think the starting point is you look at parity. What is a mid to senior Department of Justice lawyer getting to do this sort of work? The bottom line money figures that I've been seeing really don't seem to be in line with what a DOJ lawyer gets with benefits, factoring in overhead. So what I have heard anecdotally that in California it's actually law that when compensating attorneys doing public defense work, there needs to be parity. And so the attorneys there are taken care of that way. And so what I wanted to know is whether or not you all look at that issue. And it just seems to me like to determine salary or compensation in these cases, that's where you'd look. What is a DOJ lawyer making who does child welfare work, and then factor in our overhead? Mm-hmm. Is any of that considered in your calculations?
I mean, I will answer that question to the best that I can, just understanding that I'm not, part of the contracts team and I haven't been with the agency for a super long time. But, I think that we have not been allocated funding from the legislature that has been sufficient to make sure that there is pay parity. I think that is something that there have been a number of advocates that have been fighting for a long time, and you know, I agree that it would make a lot of sense to do things that way. But I think that there's been a, you know, lack of funding from the legislature has made that being able to reach those kinds of goals a really difficult thing. So,
and I appreciate that, and that's why
probably a dissatisfactory answer, but
yeah, well, I've always been puzzled. I've always been puzzled by we go to the legislature and a law was passed that now kind of locks us in, and I've just never understood why the focus has not been on passing laws that require pay parity, as opposed to changing the system where we can't go on a pay-by-case basis. We kind of, in a way, you know, it just seems like that's where the focus should be. Right. And then the state would have to fund us the way that is, in a way that's equitable.
Right. I think, yeah, I mean, I think you're right, and it makes a lot of sense. And I think there was this last legislative session, there was a bill that was introduced that was crafted primarily by ODCA and OCDLA and AFSCME, and we as an agency supported that bill. And what it did is it directed the commission to essentially adopt, you know, caseload standards, but also compensation levels. And I believe that the final bill ended up having something that specifically talked about compensation levels related to having some sort of parity with prosecutors. It's been a little while, so I don't have the bill in front of me. I mean, one of the challenges there is that the commission can say, this is how much we need to pay people, and these are the caseloads. We still have to fight the legislature for the money. But I think that the nice thing about that bill is it would have been the legislature telling the commission, hey, you need to do this. And then when the commission comes back and says, well, this is what it is, I think it makes it harder for the legislature to then say, well, we're not going to pay for it when we told you you needed to develop these standards. So that, I think, was part of the strategy in trying to get that bill passed. And unfortunately, the way that session ended without a quorum, that bill did not end up passing. But I do think that you know, advocacy for more funding so that we can actually get the pay scales to be appropriate is something that we're all really passionate about. And fortunately, you know, there are a lot of people in the public now who have a much better understanding, I think, of our criminal justice system than they did maybe, you know, 15, 20 years ago, and a lot more understanding of the problems in the system and the need to fund public defenders. And I think that the sort of the corollary to that is that we need to end mass incarceration and you know, take some of the demand down, because if we didn't have such a massive number of cases flowing through our system, it certainly would make it a little bit easier to have reasonable caseloads and better pay. Anyway, though, I will get off my soapbox, but I really appreciate your comments. I don't see anyone else's hand raised. If anyone else has a comment that they want to make, I think you can go ahead and David Hawcrafter.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure can.
All right. I would like to just touch briefly as a follow-up on the prior person's comments. Very well taken. I think they were important on the notions of parity. However, parity is something that's not well understood. It can mean a lot of things, and the type of analysis that needs to be done probably needs to be done by OPDS at this time. And it's a multi-level analysis. In King County, prior to their going in-house as employees, their public defense system tried to do contracting with parity, but that parity analysis had to do both what is the pay scales, you know, what are the pay scales at attorney 1, attorney 2, attorney 3, how many levels out, but also how many attorneys at any given time we're at each level within the, say, the prosecutor's office there, or here the AG's office, to be able to then know what are all the actual dollars in the prosecution side of the system, and how many FTEs do they have associated with that, to know what that average salary level is, as long as OPDS here is going to continue to contract. Because otherwise you don't know what that pot of money is and what the average cost per FTE is. What the downside of the process, and Brooke was right, there was some better aspects of how this thing was done, and some difficult parts of saying, well, you tell us how much we should pay you. It was kind of a moving target, versus OPDS saying, here's what the average salary per FTE should be if we're going to have pure quote unquote salary parity. Now, toss in the compensation, not salary compensation for benefits, et cetera, because you need that in there as well to get the rest of that. So that stuff are things that OPDS can be doing now in the background. It has manpower, right? So if you can be doing that, we will then have that data at our disposal. So then we're not just shooting in the dark to come up with numbers.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I appreciate that, and that definitely echoes some of the things that we heard in the survey. And I do want to just make a note, I talked about parity, and I think that, we kind of have learned in our advocacy that parity is kind of a loaded word, and it's complicated because, district attorney pay it actually varies by county, and it's maybe not the best, the best way to figure out what public defense providers should be paid. Maybe it's more about looking at DOJ attorneys. Maybe it's more at looking at like median rates of pay just for attorneys generally. I think there's a variety of ways to kind of come up with what the appropriate compensation is. But I think the overall point is that we all know that we need to make sure that people are paid the right amount, and that the amount of funding we've had has been too small up until this point. So as far as process questions then, or answers to the process question before we move on to the next topic, any other comments about timing, transparency, anything along those lines, or else we'll move to the next question. All right, well, let's go ahead and move to the next. So the next question that we asked is about, now that we've moved away from the case credit model of compensation, what are our thoughts on how provider compensation should be set? And I will say, this question, one of the responses that we've received to a variety of our questions, not on mute, so I'm going to mute over here. I think I muted everyone. Okay, so one of the comments that we've received, and I think I've gotten this question as well from some folks, that that our move away from the case credit model has been a bit confusing for some folks, and basically just the idea being that because we don't have specific caseload standards or a specific way of measuring cases, and we don't have a specific understanding of exactly what an FTE is, how many hours a year is that of casework, that it has been a bit difficult for some folks to implement moving to a new model and figuring out what that new model works like. And in addition, that there are some folks who have just decided to kind of keep using the case credit model because of the fact that it's sort of difficult, at least in the way that, they get compensation from us and that's how it's being distributed, because it's just hard to figure out. So I will say that I think, having some discussion about, how folks are implementing the model is certainly something that I think is worth having a conversation about. And then aside from that, just the general, that's sort of my disclaimer on that, but some of the comments we received are some folks were really promoting the FTE model, and some folks with sort of like an hourly rate per year. When I used to be in private practice at a law firm, we had our I think it was like 1,800 hours of billable hours a year that we had to do. Some firms was a lot more, some were a little bit less, and you just sort of had to meet that benchmark, and that was what full time was. Some folks thinking that if we did an FTE model, that folks should just tell us sort of I'm working one, I have folks working one full FTE, or they're working 0.75, or they're working 0.5, and that there just be an expectation that they put in a certain number of hours in order to meet that on their casework. Some folks have talked about doing a mix of FTE and hourly, where folks can essentially choose whether or not they want to be FTE or hourly. Some folks brought up the fact that they feel like, the case credit model was problematic because it encouraged quick resolution of cases, whereas hourly kind of motivates the opposite. So they kind of thought, well, or at least their comment sort of suggested that this is almost a red herring, and that the real issue is oversight and making sure that folks are doing the work that they should be doing. Let's see here. I think those are kind of the main. Some folks talked about compensation fee should be set basically based on cost of living, overhead, expenses. Some folks talked about the demand for legal services in a particular area and how that should influence things. And I will say this question kind of ties into one of the next ones, which is about like, what should cause things to be at different rates, and if it should be different in geography. So these conversations may kind of overlap a little bit. But so I guess I would love to get folks responses to that, thoughts about that. Does some sort of an FTE rate make sense to folks, or a choice between FTE and hourly? Just kind of curious about folks' thoughts about that. Or thoughts about the, moving away from the case credit model, and if you've had any sort of challenges understanding that, or successes in sort of thinking about how you've changed your business practices because of that switch. Bruce Leibowitz. Oh, and you're on mute, so you'll need to unmute yourself. It's the there's like a little bar at the bottom, and it has a little microphone on it.
Steve also looks like he's raising his hand. Steve, can you unmute yourself?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we sure can, and we'll let Bruce figure it out for a second there, and then we'll let him go next.
So hopefully you all know that I helped run MCAD, Marion County Association of Defenders, for I think 8 years. And we were, while I was the executive director, we were always an hourly rate system, even though everybody else in the state was case count, or however you want to do it. We had a darn pretty good system, I think, in doing hourly rate systems. Part of it was because we had a set computer program that everybody had, all the attorneys had, and we could tell, and OPDS could tell, because we provided all this information to the state through our monthly billings to the state. And so I was hopeful that OPDS now would at least look at the system that we had, because it worked really well, at least I believe, and I think at the time everybody thought it worked really well. And our costs were pretty much comparable, if not a little lower than the case count costs. So you know, everybody worries when you have an hourly rate system that people are going to be, you know, it's going to be the cost. No one's going to be able to control the cost. And I think we were. So again, I'm pushing that somebody at OPDS or through some committee, we can help you all do that. And frankly, OPDS has all of our statistics from that time. And I think Steve Krasik and I have it as well because we've saved it. And of course, Alcott knows all about the system as well because he was on the board at the time. But the other thing that you mentioned was the difference in hourly rates for basically the same work, whether it's because somebody's living in Portland and other people are living in Medford, or some other way of negotiating an hourly rate for an attorney doing basically the same work. I'm just going to say that I don't think that works at all, because frankly, why should X, I mean, unless you could really say it's because the cost of living in Portland is way higher than the cost of living in, say, Medford again, or Salem or whatever, and put that out, it really leads to, I think, a lot of problems when, say, one attorney, and I'm going to use death penalty because I've had a death penalty contract for years, and years ago, when other people were in charge of OPDS, they negotiated different rates for just different people. And it was unclear why it was. It was probably based, unfortunately, on favoritism. But that's what it leads to. It leads to people being jealous of other people when there's no set reason that is given for giving somebody, say, $110 an hour for a contract. Again, I'll use death penalty, or $100 or $90. And again, years ago, mitigators were paid the same way, where X mitigator, because who knows why, got X dollars per hour, and Y mitigator got Z dollars per hour. And that system really doesn't work unless you can really say that it's because of, you know, some statistical reason like a cost of living or something. Okay, we know Portland may be more expensive, but you got to have it so that everybody knows why the rates are different. Otherwise, it looks like, and may in fact be, because somebody at, I'm just going to say it, somebody at OPDS likes X attorney better than Y attorney. Mm-hmm. That doesn't work. And unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever get what the state is paying their attorneys because we're just at the low of the lows in regard to providing public service, and we're willing to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, and I appreciate hearing some of the history there. It's helpful for me to understand. Bruce, have you had any luck unmuting yourself?
Have I?
Yes, we can hear you.
Just took a second to find the icon. So thank you. So PDC, we're still using a modified case credit model just to keep some track of what each firm's bringing in and that there's some equivalencies. And then we're paying, we're setting money aside to pay for trial days to take us out of the Sixth Amendment issue. And it may only be $400 a day for a trial day, but it's something, and it takes that argument away. I would like to say that being in Portland, just parking alone is $285 a month now. So there are differences. And having done this now for almost 20 years in terms of RFPs, I found that our analysts have treated us fairly. There, of course, are politics in any agency. One organization might be favored over the other at a certain point. But I never felt that the analyst was trying to do that. And right now, I think what would benefit us the most is just as soon as possible, knowing what we're looking at for next year. Because the rents, all the you know, a lot of the things around the state are just fixed the same, bar dues, PLF, but we've got other things, and the sooner we can hear back, the easier it is to plan. And I echo all the sentiments about trying to hire someone at least a 2-month process and generally 3 to 4 months if you can find someone. And you know, we have to be cognizant of the fact that there's not going to be any new money coming in. So despite everybody's best efforts and despite markedly better communication with your agency, unfortunately, we've all been thrown for a loop by this. But I do want to say that there's been a markedly better communication. And now it's really just trying to, as quickly as possible, be able to plan for next year. I mean, there are no new RFPs. You have the information. So, you know, there you go. Things can't change that radically. That's all I wanted to say.
Right, great, thank you. I see that KO has a comment.
No, says I'm unmuting. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Oh, okay. Two things about the different rates around the state, and one is, and I know my situation is somewhat unique, but I do cases all over the state, so it would be really frustrating for me to try to figure out what case, what count, what if the rate, if my rate would have to be the same, and then I'm going into a county that perhaps my rate's different from what an attorney in that county is, and then you get that inequity. So I think it causes problems for that. But also I think a consideration needs to be that while the cost of living might be higher in Portland, we have retention problems in other parts of the state, in the more rural parts of the state. And therefore, I think there's some benefit to paying those attorneys what someone in Portland is paid to encourage attorneys to move out to the more rural areas and stay out there and establish their practice out there. Because I do know that a lot of folks in rural areas have a lot of retention problems. And when you talk about quality of legal representation, one way that you're going to get that is by getting more experienced attorneys all over the state.
Yeah, I would say, KO, that does echo a number of the comments that we got on that particular question about whether or not there should be a different rate depending on what area of the state you're in. And it was interesting. I think there were some folks who said, well, their, you know, cost of living is higher in certain areas. And so, you know, incorporating some analysis of cost of living or the cost of your overhead could be helpful. At the same time, we also got comments that there are, you know, that simply dividing by, like, you know, urban rural or something like that doesn't always make a lot of sense, because there are places like Hood River where the cost of living is actually really high, despite the fact that it might be considered a rural area. And then the comment about the difficulty in attracting attorneys to some of those rural areas, and that you know, having competitive pay with folks who are in the valley is actually good for not having, you know, everybody just want to live in the city and not get enough attorneys out into those areas. So I think there's, that echoes a number of those comments that we received. I see that Karen Stenard made a comment. I'm concerned that an hourly rate disadvantages experienced attorneys who can settle or try cases more efficiently. Karen, did you want to elaborate on that, or just have that comment? Okay, I'm going to assume that that is good. Karen, if you do want to jump in, go ahead. And then Brooke has a comment, which he says he does not need elaboration on, but I'm just going to read it out loud for folks to hear. He says he's really grateful for the switch from FTE to FTE from case counts. It's been more equitable and has allowed his office to focus on quality of representation representation instead of being obsessed with taking every last case. So thank you, Brooke, for that. So I feel like some of our conversation blended in a little bit to that conversation about different rates for different regions of the state. And so if folks have more comments about this, or if they want to comment on that issue about rates being different in different areas of the state, I would love to hear your comments. And you can feel free and raise your hand or write a comment. Or if you're on the phone, just hit *6. I see Gordon Mallon wants to make a comment. Go ahead, Gordon. And you're going to have to take yourself off mute. And it's the little microphone button that shows up when you cover your mouth. There you go. Oh, but for some reason we still can't hear you.
Yeah.
I'm going to try again.
There I go.
There you are. I can hear you.
I kept tapping the button and it didn't want to react. But now it did.
Got it to work.
I was a rural practitioner in one of our most rural areas for about 20 years. And the problem that we have out there that vitiates against having the same rate as everybody else is there are not enough cases on a steady basis to maintain. There may be only 10 hours of work in a particular month. Now, I fought that issue for about 20 years and finally won that with OPDS after I was ready to leave. So I never got the benefit of my fight. But some months there's a whole lot of work to do, and you have to have attorneys on hand all the time, ready to do the work when it comes. You can't sort of lay people off and hire them next month and then lay them off the month after that. So there has to be some differentiation to account for that, and currently there is, but that needs to remain.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Thank you, Gordon.
So this is Karen. Can I elaborate now? I hung up on myself before. That was
we got that.
So yeah, I am generally very much in favor of moving away from the case count, and it's a done deal anyhow. But I do have concerns about how both the FTE model and the hourly rate model impacts more experienced attorneys. I don't, the PCRP model, for example, somebody that's brand new is making the same amount as somebody that's put in 25 years. And under the hourly rate, if I can really quickly resolve or try a case, I'm paid less to do that than somebody that takes a longer time and brings less experience, and all the things that go with experience to the table. So that's just something that has bothered me about this, and I don't feel like there's been a lot of talk about it. Maybe there has been behind the scenes. Thank you.
Now I was muted. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate the comment. And one thing that I have been curious about myself is that, we contract with either the nonprofit or the law firm or the consortia, and then pay a certain amount of money, but then how that money is distributed to the attorneys is not something that we sort of micromanage, and can't necessarily micromanage it just because we're dealing with independent contractors. And so I have had some curiosity about how that actually plays out in the field. I would imagine that with some of the contracts that there are, that people are compensated, the attorneys are compensated at different rates based on experience. But maybe that's not the case. And I know when we have the standard rate, I guess it raises a question to me of whether or not just a flat standard rate per attorney makes sense, or if we should be taking into account the experience level of attorneys that are in the contract proposal. So maybe it's how many years you've been practicing, how complicated the cases are that you're taking, things like that. So it does raise that question for me, at least, of what the appropriate way of handling that is. And it looks like Gordon may have a follow-up comment.
Yeah, and I unmuted myself
Yay.
ahead of time. Just to echo what Karen says, there has to, whether it's an hourly rate basis or an FTE basis, there has to be differentiation between less experienced and more experienced attorneys and less qualified and more qualified attorneys. I mean, in government, you'd have attorney 1, attorney 2, senior attorney. I don't know how many categories they have, but that has to be recognized. Otherwise, there's no incentive for qualified, well-qualified, experienced attorneys to stick around.
Thank you for that. Other folks have thoughts about the things that have been said, or just this topic generally?
Hello, this is Alcott Thompson.
Yeah, go ahead.
Wanted to make sure you could hear me now. I am the person Steve Gorham referred to. I'm now the interim director of MCAD. Just to let you know what we're doing, we are keeping the sort of the same credit system, and the primary driver of that is we don't know what's going to happen with whenever we get another contract, and we didn't want to have to change systems in January and then change them in June, which was what was going to happen originally. So we're waiting to find out how this all floats out before we just keep changing pay systems, which is somewhat difficult because we're in a consortia. Ultimately, beyond my comments that I sent in an email and in the survey, I urge you folks not to be, and I think the comments that other people have made are this as well. Do not continue to be driven by your accounting folks. This is not a one-size-fits-all by any means. I mean, that's ultimately, in my view, what drove the credit system. It was easy. You could just say, hey, we pay this much per credit. We don't have any control over the number of credits. It's not our fault. To do a quality system, you cannot operate on a one-size-fits-all in any way, shape, or form, and it means that there have to be variables all over the place. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I just see that Gordon said yes to Cott's comment. So getting that into the record for folks who are on the phone. Other folks who have thoughts about this particular topic that would like to jump in? And again, for folks on the phone, it's *6 to unmute yourself. And if no one's jumping in, I can share a little bit more of some of the thoughts that folks shared in the survey, specifically around this sort of question of, you know, if there is some sort of more of a standardized rate or a standardized system, what would justify sort of a variance either in those standard rates or rate, or a variance from a rate. A number of folks talked about what some things that have been mentioned already about experience and qualifications. Someone brought up the idea of litigiousness in the DA's office, or DHS and DOJ in the particular area. Definitely one of the comments that was brought up a couple of times had to do with if there are areas where there are not enough attorneys. And so because there's not enough attorneys, there's just really a difficulty reducing the caseloads of folks because there's just not enough people to take the cases. Let's see here. Work performance was something that some folks brought up, which although I would say that could be, I would think that would be a little bit challenging. And I think maybe makes a bit more sense within the entities themselves. Let's see here. But then another person brought up, experience, qualifications, and quality metrics, and gave some specifics there. So they talked about, how many days a week does the attorney visit their clients in jail? How many continuances do they request? Do they make themselves available to their clients in their office? How often? So some metrics. See here, and one person provided a really interesting suggestion of creating some incentives for hiring, mentoring, and training lawyers and staff who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and for offices who gather outcome data that can be disaggregated by race, gender, ethnicity, and age. So the interesting suggestion there. And then also just this kind of like building on that about circumstances in different jurisdictions that might justify different rates. Very complex cases with extreme cost to the system and clients. Someone brought up language ability or specialized background. Again, more serious cases or more difficult cases. So those are some of the things that folks have brought up. So I'm curious if folks have comments or thoughts about any of those things, or any other thoughts about this question of, how the rates are set and how they may vary. So you can either raise your hand or you can go ahead. Okay, David Hawcrafter.
A lot of good ideas have been put out there, and a lot of things that have worked for a lot of people over the years. One thing that I want to be sure we don't get stuck in, which is this rut that public defense has been in for 40 some years in this state, which is, well, they're going to never get to us until the last part of the session, no matter what, and they'll take whatever crumbs are left. Here you go. You've made it work so far. Just keep making it work. And the attorneys, a bunch of true believers, which we are, make it work. And unfortunately, that public defender tax works out pretty hard on the attorneys, staff, everybody that's basically working for a lot less than they should be and doing high quality work for a lot of people that really need it. We need to know where we're going, have that, whatever system it is, what is the ultimate goal? If it's a parity scale, we need to know where that target value will be, what that formula looks like, even if it's 4 or 5 years out. It's okay, we got 2 long sessions, a couple of short sessions. Here's how much money needs to be increased each time to get there. So everybody working in the system knows, okay, we're not going to get it all at once, but we're going to get part of it this time. We're going to get part of it that time. The legislature can see the roadmap and know where the goal is. If it's an FTE-based system, well, should be probably some state employees created out of it, but that's a different thing. But have that target so everybody sees that progress is being made. Have COLA attached to it. Have all these types of things. Everybody across the board. If it's a consortia, independent contractors versus your private bar versus your big firms, it should all be kind of on the same footing across the board because you're all doing the same work essentially. So the types of supports and resources need to be there across the system, across the state, not really worry so much about, well, Salem's going to get less than Portland's going to get less than, Coos County. It needs to have the same amount of money out there to begin with, tweak it later. But if we don't see that progress being made, we end up doing what's been very frustrating for the last couple of rounds, which is watch the money just disappear. And then be told, well, we're just going to extend it, 11th hour. Oops, well, we're just going to extend the same thing. So what we're doing is the same thing over and over and over. And I think it does start to become difficult to talk to the attorneys to say, well, they tell us we're going to do something good next time. But I don't have anything I can actually show them to say this really will happen. The legislature needs to buy in. OPDS needs to sell it hard. And we need to get a plan in place over the 5-year plan, if you will.
Thank you, David. I appreciate the comment. And I think that, yeah, I mean, a roadmap is definitely something that we would really like moving forward. And I think, yeah, we share your frustration that we were very, very hopeful that we were going to be able to do something different, and then things did not work out the way that any of us wanted. So it's been a frustrating situation all around. So I definitely think we empathize with what y'all have been going through. Other folks that wanted to add comments about this particular topic? And I guess, you know, one of the questions that I have as well, because I think this is kind of a hard part of where we're at right now. And so I just want to raise it and sort of get some impressions from you all, is that in order to address problems that we have in the system with compensation, really what we've been hoping to have is to get more funding, so that we could both address some of all of these issues that we've been talking about like creating more transparency and, you know, some sort of more standardization. And maybe that standardization is a little bit more complex than just saying each attorney makes this amount. Maybe there's some of these other things that are taken into account, but without, you know, we wanted to address some of those things while sort of raising folks up who are the ones who have been, you know, who are at the lower end of the disparities. Without additional money, you know, if we shift to a new system of allocating the funding, it could mean that, and excuse me for my trying to do this with my broken hand, but that there's some, you know, some folks that we would want to raise up, but that could potentially create problems, because then where do we get that money from, right? And so if we want to create something more standardized, it may mean that it might ultimately mean that, you know, some folks who have been better off under the current system would then end up, you know, not being as well off. And I think that that's something that none of us really want. We don't, like, it's not a great situation. And so I'm just kind of curious to get folks' impressions about, you know, like, as we move to something different, it may mean that it shakes out a little bit different in the end. And so I think that's a conundrum for us and how to deal with that. And maybe I'm just sharing that as sharing our conundrum, but kind of curious how you all respond to that and what your thoughts are about it. I mean, because the other option is, you know, leave things the way they are until we get more money. So, you know, that's a or do something slightly different. So, I mean, I think it's a challenging thing. I'm also seeing a note here from Lane about, you know, I mean, one thing that we have been talking about a lot, and Eric is going to be leading a separate group on, is NREs. And I will say that NREs are a very, very large section of our budget. And so, you know, it is possible that if we were to try to tighten things up in that realm, it would give us some more funding to avoid this kind of situation that I'm talking about you know, potentially, you know, trying to create more equity actually is good for some folks and bad for others. So I think it's a little bit complicated, and just sort of wanted to bring that up for the sake of transparency and see if folks wanted to respond. I see there's a comment. Karen wrote, do you mean cuts or smaller increases to better funded groups? There's a big difference between cutting a group's income versus not raising it as much as others. I think I get what you're saying there, Karen, and feel free to jump on if you don't. I mean, I think if I don't get this right, I think, you know, one of the things that we were looking at when we were anticipating getting the extra funding from the special purpose appropriation was, okay, well, you know, it's this is oversimplifying, right? Because there's different circumstances in different places, which have made some compensation higher or lower depending on a variety of factors. And so, you know, with additional funding, our hope was we could look at, like, you know, who's hurting the worst, and apply, you know, add funding in some of those places while also creating some more standardization and transparency around what the contracts, how they're being awarded. And so it's like, yeah, some people would get a bigger bump than others, right? We're trying to, like, get all boats rise, but also create equity. The problem that we have right now is that our professional services account, which is the amount of money that we have to compensate providers, it's a fixed pie. It's a set amount. And so if we want to try to create equity, and try to apply some funding or some resources to the places that need it the most, that money has to come from somewhere. And so that, I think it creates a big challenge for us. And we are definitely trying to look at, like, is there a way that we can tighten our NREs to get some extra funding? But I don't know if that's going to be, if that would be sufficient to be able to really address things. And so, I mean, maybe part of it is, there's somebody made a comment earlier about having, like, a, you know, if we had like a 5-year roadmap of here's where we're hoping to get to, and this is what it's going to look along the way, that would help help all of you. But yeah, some of this I think is a little bit difficult and challenging. Karen, did you want to jump in and say anything else in addition to that?
Well, just, I mean, I think it'd be really difficult to accept getting a cut. I think it would be one thing to say you're getting 2%, whereas somebody else is getting 5 or 10 or whatever. But I think redistributing, when people generally rely on the fact that they're likely, unless there's a major change in cases that are coming in, generally you're assuming that you're not going to be making less money. Mm-hmm. And so I think it would be really difficult. I mean, all of us are having such a hard time recruiting and planning as it is. And if on the horizon is the possibility that in order to make things more equal, some groups might be looking at making less money, I think A, we need to know that, and B, I don't think it's going to go over real big, but.
Right. Well, and I don't mean to give anybody any heartburn. I don't think that Lane has suggested that that's something that we're going to do. I just, I wanted to share at least the conundrum that we're in, and that trying to fix things is complicated when we have a set amount of money, and the legislature has not given us more. I am seeing another note just here about, though, how we spend $5 million on discovery every biennium, and that's ridiculous. $5 million would sure help us a lot. So I know that's something that I'm very interested in looking into, if we could pass some legislation that standardizes and or limits the amount of money that prosecutors can charge for discovery. That would be potentially a pool of money that would help us do, Karen, what you're talking about, which is, you know, maybe you're raising some folks up more than others, but you're not cutting anybody's compensation. Other folks that have comments or thoughts about that? So the next question that we had was about provisions in OPDS contracts, and just a question about whether or not there's some provisions in there that should be changed. And I can just share with you briefly some of the things that folks mentioned. One comment was about contract section 7.1.1, which I believe has to do with juvenile contracts that are non-PCRP contracts, and there's just some concern about the standards. Let me just make sure that I'm looking at this note correctly, that there's some standards about those juvenile cases that are very difficult to meet when you don't aren't having as much funding as there is funding in the PCRP counties. I think that there were a few other comments also just about standards in general, and about that if standards are things that are sort of aspirational, but folks can't actually meet them, then there's a sort of a question of whether or not it makes sense to have those in the contracts. Let me see about other. One person indicated remove NDAs and non-competes. Don't allow for delegation of client face time, especially for in-custody defendants. One person wrote about needing more clarity about our new system and how it should be implemented when we don't have a case credit model. Let's see here. There were a couple comments about caseloads and the fact that we don't have those yet, and that makes things challenging. And then there was just an overall comment about the current contract being overly detailed, but also vague. So those are just some suggestions about things that could be changed around the contract. That kind of actually ties into the next question that I had asked, which is about if there should be minimum standards that should be held in the contracts. So this is where there were some more of those comments about aspirational standards not necessarily making sense if we're not able to meet them, just because of the, in particular, because of the compensation rates. Although then there were other folks that suggested that there should be more specific case-related standards. Someone suggested that we should have a requirement that people have staff, do client surveys, attend OCDLA conferences. Some folks thought that it's better to just let the community of professionals determine the minimum qualifications rather than having it be something that we're doing. There was a couple of suggestions for more oversight and more training, and in particular, more oversight on a regular basis. Quite a few different opinions about standards and minimum standards, requiring weekly contact with in-custody clients. Some folks wanted requirements of reporting of open and closed cases to OPDS or keeping and reporting time. So those were a variety of those things that just have to do with the actual contract provisions. So I'm curious about folks' comments, either responses to any of the things that I just mentioned or additional thoughts that you may have about the actual contract provisions. And again, reminder for folks on the phone, it's *6 if you want to make a comment, or you can raise your hand or hit me up in the chat. I'm a little surprised there's no comments. This is your chance. Maybe you all felt that you got it out in the survey. No thoughts or reactions to any of that?
This is Casey. Just a reminder to everyone that you do have to unmute yourselves or wave your hand if you want to make a comment and you're using the video feed.
Thank you, Casey. All right, well, the last question was really my catch-all, which was just sort of like, are there other things that you feel like you want to comment on? And so I guess I will just open it up at this point as a free-for-all. If there are things that we've talked about that you want to comment on, or if there are other things that we haven't mentioned that you'd like to bring up, definitely want to hear from all of you. I'm seeing a chat. Nope, there's not actually a chat. Anyone else have any other comments? Y'all got real quiet. We've got somebody waiting in the lobby that just joined us. Well, we are at 1:26 and we have made it through the questions. And I know you all are very busy folks, so I guess I'm just going to make one last call for comments, thoughts. I would also just like to thank everybody for the thoughtful conversation today. It's been really helpful.
This is Casey again. For those of you who do think of something after this meeting concludes, you can definitely use the survey, and we can send a follow-up email if that would help everyone to just provide those additional thoughts to any of the questions that were covered today.
All right, well, if nobody jumps in here in the next minute, then thank you to everybody who joined. Really appreciate your thoughts and comments. Please keep them coming. As Casey mentioned, we would really appreciate folks adding any additional comments in the survey. And I am getting just a thank you from Mark Harden. Thank you, Mark, for joining in. I'm really glad to have commission members on here. And I got a text message from another person about the next steps for the process. So just for those of you who are still on the call, we will be typing up the notes from this, both a transcript and then creating a high-level summary. I am also creating a summary of the responses to the survey that we've received. We're going to be sharing all of this with the commission and then having internal discussions at OPDS about how this can influence the actions that we take moving forward. I know that there is a sense of urgency from a lot of you, so we are going to do everything that we can to communicate about next steps as quickly as possible, but really don't want this conversation to be over. So please do reach out with any thoughts or suggestions as we move forward. So I think I'm going to call it. And thank you. Thank you to everybody. All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.